Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to now announce that we have amongst us Honorable Minister of State for Prime Minister's Office, Dr. Jitendra Singh, Minister of State, Independent Charge for the Ministry of Science and Technology, and Minister of Personal, Public Grievances and Pensions, Department of Atomic Energy and Department of Space. Let's please welcome him with a huge round of applause. And without further ado, I would now like to invite on stage DGUSI to deliver the welcome address.
Dr. Jitendra Singh Ji, Honorable Minister. Firstly, I express my deep gratitude for his presence at this Indian Military Heritage Festival. In fact, his presence here is very, very inspiring for all of us. And he just landed at the airport and it's made it convenient to be with us. So we are exceptionally grateful, sir. Now, this event, Indian Military History Literature Festival, is a maiden effort by the USI, first of its kind in India, in collaboration with National Museum Institution, Ministry of Culture, and News 18 Network. In fact, the whole proceedings from yesterday in the morning till about 5 o'clock in the present session is all live on different kind of social media and TV channels. This is a unique opportunity for USI of India, which is 154 years old military research establishment. And in fact, if you see, the entire strategic culture of India is synonymous with the growth of USI as an institution. USI Journal is the only journal in Asia which has been published in an uninterrupted manner since 1871. Our institution, it looks at the whole gambit of comprehensive national security with a focus on conflict studies, geopolitics, revolution in military affairs, defense technology, defense diplomacy, and professional military education. We have aligned ourselves in sync with the vision that Honorable Prime Minister Viksit Bharat has announced for this country. And we also take a lot of pride in what we call is the period of Amrit Kal, the golden period. And our entire research, debate, and discussion has been reorientated to see that this vision gains traction, particularly as far as Indian armed forces are concerned. Therefore, we are taking a whole of nation approach to comprehensive national security. It's not only the purview of Indian armed forces, but every citizen of the country is an important stakeholder in the security of the nation. There are a number of initiatives which USI has undertaken, one being the digitization of all the military history records of the armed forces. Then we have this Project Udbhav, which was launched yesterday by Honorable Raksha Mantri here. And what we are doing under this project is we are studying the old Indian scriptures, the old Indian system of war fighting, and creating a new strategic vocabulary for our youth and military professionals. Because we keep quoting Montgomery, Eisenhower, and all kinds of people, Sun Tzu, but there is a sort of wealth of wisdom which is within us, and therefore we are working on this Project Udbhav, and in due course of time, maybe another 5 or 6 months down the line, we would be able to produce some very credible literature to promote this idea. We also undertaken this battlefield tourism, and this is actually taking the countrymen and particularly the youth to the actual sites all over India where we fought these epic battles and our forefathers have shed their blood and made supreme sacrifice. So we want to acquaint our countrymen so that there is a natural sense of pride and it induces more sense of patriotism. Another project on which you will be briefed today, sir, is Veer Gatha. And Veer Gatha is actually what we call is the Gallantry Award portal, which we are running for the Ministry of Defense, wherein we are telling our youth particularly about the acts of valor and supreme sacrifice made by our brave hearts. And there is a website, and one of my colleagues is going to brief more about that. Then other things that we are doing, I would have an opportunity to probably discuss with you separately and take your blessings and guidance. But what we have done that this today's event or this event that we've put it together, it's a very good platform for us to showcase what India's unique military heritage is to our countrymen and to our youth. It has also provided a very good platform for cross-fertilization of ideas and to put it to our own countrymen and to world at large what are India's strategic perspectives and what India has contributed to the art of warfare and what it is capable of doing. With these few words, I just welcome you once again, and I just want to make an humble appeal to you that kindly support and guide this very unique heritage value institution of India, and we would align ourselves entirely to the government directives and the vision that has been enunciated by our Honorable Prime Minister. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, sir. May I have your permission to resume, sir? Please. Jai Hind, sir. The Honorable Minister of State in the PMO's office, Dr. Jitendra Singh. It is indeed an honor and privilege for me, sir, to be addressing you and briefing you today about a project that we undertake in the USI, that is the Gallantry Awards portal and the Veer Gatha project. Now, can I have this slide? Yeah. The Gallantry Awards initiative was started with the aim of patriotism in the country, to bind people together. And it is in keeping with the vision of our Honorable Prime Minister to make nation building the people movement. And this project furthers the Honorable Prime Minister's vision of nation building by spending time discussing the sacrifices of our valiant soldiers who've laid down their lives for the nation. Next. Now, this project was given to USI in the year 2021, sir, and we are the project monitoring unit, which is carrying out this project for the USI on behalf of the Ministry of Defense. And we create the content for the Ministry of Defense, which is then uploaded on the Ministry of Defense Gallantry Awards portal. And we develop both things which are in terms of messages, in terms of tweets, in terms of articles, in terms of video clips, in terms of write-ups on various individuals and on various battles which have taken place post-independence. So we have the awardees, we have Gallantrypedia, we have a gallery, we have a virtual museum, we have e-books and e-magazines which we upload, and we also have certain events which are carried out, and one of those events is the Veer Gatha, which I'll brief you about. Next. Now, as far as our awardees are concerned, we are over 4,500 awardees, and we are covering only the Chakra series of awardees that spread from Paramveer Chakra, Ashoka Chakra, Mahavir Chakra, Kirti Chakra, Veer Chakra, and Shaurya Chakra. And this is just some of the things that are there on the awardees, which we highlight to the public, certain postage stamps, the citations, and we make a brief on each one of these on the date of their martyrdom. Next. We also have a virtual museum, so to say, where people can go into it, visit the site, and see what is there about each of the awardees. Next. These are various tweets that have been there from around the world about it's the number of people across the world, apart from those in India, visit our site regularly. Next. The Veer Gatha project, sir, is where school students all across India write about India's heroes, and this is in the form of a poem, this is in a form of a write-up, this is in a form of an audiovisual clip, The first year we had it was 2001, next year was 2022, and this is 2023. The first year we were, of course, hampered due to the restrictions of COVID. You'll be happy to learn, sir, the first year there were 8,37,000 entries. Next year there were 19 lakh entries. And this year, sir, we've broken all records. There are 137 lakh entries from across the world, across India, from all schools. Last year, on 25th January, the people who won prizes were called to Delhi. They were honored here by the Honorable Defense Minister, Shri Rajnath Singh, as well as the Honorable Education Minister, Shri Dharmendra Pradhan. Both honored them. And this year, 100 students are being called to Delhi. And after the ceremony in which they are honored, they also get a chance to visit the Republic Day Parade, which is held next year. And this has taken a great movement across the country, sir. As you've seen, in 3 years, from 8 lakh, we've been able to have 137 lakh entries, sir. Thank you, sir, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sirs, for that address and for giving us an insight to the directives, objectives, initiatives, and vision of USI. And ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to please invite on stage Dr. Jitendra Singh, Honorable Minister of State for Prime Minister's Office. I'd request you to please come on the podium, sir, and address the gathering. Thank you. Let's please once again welcome him here with a huge round of applause.
Director General USI, General Jagat, senior officers, members of the faculty. Honestly, I was not very clear about the subject that I'm going to actually confront when I came here. And the invitation was also so vague, but it seems very interesting. So, and I think you are simultaneously discussing too many things. And in the last 20 minutes, 15 minutes, I've been here. But before I do the ministerial talk and also officially commit to offer you the kind of support that you have expected of me in your discourse, I think let's pick up from what was happening in the earlier session. And the two of the youngsters were putting up queries which went partly responded or unresponded. So as far as the army is concerned and the history of recent India, when I say recent India, at least the last 3 centuries, and which is, of course, very closely intermingled with the pre-independence India, the post-independence India, and also the freedom struggle. And when I came here, you were talking about the army revolt of 1857. I am not sure how much actually it contributed to the finally culmination of independence in 1947. And I think by and large, no such movement actually meets the kind of success it is expected unless it is a mass movement. And yes, 1857 was a kind of an uprising which had happened on account of the factors, which a number of factors which led to dissent in various ranks, including the soldiers. And as was being mentioned by the presenter here, Sapna, that they approached Bahadur Shah Zafar because that was precisely the reason that it couldn't move forward, because there was no pan-India leader available at that time. So the leader, for any successful movement, the leader emerges, just as you had JP in the JP movement, JP Narayan. So they were actually looking for a rallying point to have a leader. So they were a movement which was devoid of leader and looking for a leader. That's why a leader, that too, who was actually a non-entity by then, writing poetry and doing nothing else, which he later continued doing in Rangoon after he had been exiled. So I think the turning point in the freedom struggle of India happened with the beginning of the 20th century. The first important milestone was the return of Gandhi, because that was the time when Bal Gangadhar Tilak and the others were looking for some young person with a mass appeal, and they had heard of him. And so Gandhi was preceded by the reputation that came from South Africa, where he had actually successfully raised that banner of revolt, so they thought they could capitalize on that. The second turning point was the hanging of Bhagat Singh and others, which was, of course, not actually the ultimate culmination was the non-violent movement of Gandhi, but it generated a lot of sentiment across the country. And the third, of course, was the Quit India movement. And never, I think, an army rebellion was very essential to the freedom struggle, and rightly so. And I think that also is a virtue of the Indian Army. It's being non-political, apolitical. And when we talk of soldiery, we talk of army, we talk of martial subjects in India, it is also very natural in the sense that this is a land which has always faced invasion after the other. So we never had opportunity to live in peace for a long, unlike many other European countries who never heard of a war. And the paradox is that we celebrate peace, we worship peace, but we don't live in peace. Even in the land of Buddha and Gandhi, it's never so. And therefore, it becomes inherent in our blood to be a soldier to a lesser or a bigger extent, whether in uniform or not, whether actually regimented or not. So it's become partly, and that's why I think the diverse kind of interest I could see when I partly heard the youngster was talking about the quantum things and things. I think towards another, after a few minutes, I'll respond to that because that's very closely related to what actually they should be expecting of me. So the public representatives, I think hereafter, will have to tell also what is to be expected rather than to bow down to what is expected. Because if you sit at a dharna outside my office, then to get rid of the nuisance, I'll do that. But what actually is, so that was, she raised a very pertinent thing. But before that, I think I actually need to compliment you for which, for all this initiative which you've been just talking about. And I think this is also one of the best times happening because one of the best times happening for India as such. You just had a very successful G20 and India emerged as one of the frontline nations of the world, Modi as the tallest leader of the world, and India in a position to give lead to others rather than being led, as has been evident from Chandrayaan and the other so many series of achievements. For a country which started off much later in its space journey compared to the then Soviet Union or the USA. Today we have landed in the southern pole, which is a virgin area, though we have not shared our inputs as yet. But all the other countries of the world are waiting for us to share what we have seen there, what we have gathered from there. So we are now, I think the world is now ready to be led by us. Now it's up to us how far we do it. And so also is true of the army, because Indian army, right from the ages, has the opportunity to work in the most heterogeneous conditions, unlike the Western countries. So you carry all those uniform and all those paraphernalia in spite of the hot, humid weather. And that also gives you a certain amount of toughness. But the methodologies have changed, and that is what the girl there was talking about. In a moment, I'll touch upon that when I talk also about the students that you said, the 8 lakh entries.
Initially.
Yeah. So I think just as India is now being recognized as a force to reckon with in more than one areas, including the space, it's also very closely interrelated with the defense, because defense no longer is the kind of defense that you saw in Mughal-e-Azam or Sikandar-e-Azam. It's more of a technology-based, and I think we'll have to reorient ourselves. So to that extent, of course, the United Service Institution of India with this tri-service think tank I was reading over there, the literature of research, development, and various aspects of defense, I think will also try to update itself, and I'm sure they are looking for that. That's one of the objectives must be. And the military heritage festival, because having seen army working very closely and also having lived in some of the terror-affected areas, I think Indian army has been performing a tough job in the most difficult circumstances. And they have always been put on trial, particularly after they were deployed on the civilian duties, somewhere after 1990 or so. which was a new kind of an experience, you would agree. And I very vividly remember that in the early 90s, we had a seminar over here, and K.F. Rustamji was still around, the first Director General of BSF. He was there, and he said one of the best ways of ruining an army is to put it on a civilian duty. So there was a very strong opinion against because they had been groomed in a kind of a culture, and they didn't want to actually intrude into that sanctity or that maybe what they would see as a polluting their kind of the character, the inherent trait which they had been developed. But then the circumstances forced, and now we have unified commands. And that was one of the most, and I have seen the early years of terrorism. There's so many allegations about the so-called human rights, etc. Always exclusively being posed on the army persons and never on the inflictor of the terrorism. So the perpetrator of terrorism will go with a word of sympathy, and the person on the other side would always be at the receiving end. So it took quite some time for the army also to do that, to learn how to follow that optimum. And I remember one of your General Rodericks was very much upset in the early years of I think it was late 80s, or soon after Punjab cooled down and Jammu Kashmir started. And he said, you have put a chain around the ankles of my soldier, and then you are asking him to operate. So it was, so I think I must salute the Indian soldiers, because the Indian army particularly, because the army in the West doesn't face such kind of situation. They're never called to. The social, the cultural milieu is different, the requirements are different, the homogeneity is very cohesive. So to that extent, I think this indeed merits a subject which requires a lot of academics research and updating from time to time, and also needs to be celebrated, as you said, heritage festival, which I'm sure first of its kind. And actually what happens is that you need to retreat it after every few years, because the generation which doesn't see war for long tends to forget. So, because it's always, I personally believe it's a sin to make an allegation against an army man, unless you have a very compelling reason, because all of us are performing our task or indulging in this academic jargon because there's somebody guarding us outside. So if the soldier doesn't stand there to guard, we won't be enjoying the luxury of doing academic gymnastics in these air-conditioned halls. So I think that is a realization, but that dawns at the wartime, and then otherwise we tend to forget. So there's not been a war, luckily, for quite some time, except for that, the proxy war going on. So it's also important, like you do in most of the other academic subjects, the kind of upgrading from time to time and regrading. And this is also, as I said, one of the better times happening, because what you do in India tends to set a trend in the rest of the world. For example, it was the Prime Minister who suggested International Yoga Day. It was accepted all over unanimously with the United States. It was Prime Minister of India who suggested International Day of Millets, and countries across the world who didn't know what is millets about or never heard of it started, indulging in this. And in the recent also, you saw the biofuel initiative being taken. I think these are some of the things, these are technological things which are going to be, which require to be adopted in a much bigger way, even in the Indian Army and the armed forces, than they have been taken up before. Now, as far as I think time has now come when I was just about to suggest that you said 8 lakh students. When they go back from here, as you said, you could next time also, you send them for the Republic Day, but before they go back to their respective places, they could have some kind of an exposure over the technological breakthroughs that we have, even in our defense strategies. So the warfare today is no longer the warfare of yesterday. And if we are still into that, maybe then we are not optimally prepared to actually meet the challenges. About 7-8 years back, when you had that incident in Pampur, where one of our very precious colonels lost his life. I think he was, after the operation was over, he just went there and said. So I had sitting with me the ambassador from Israel, Daniel Cameron. He's no longer around. He's retired, but he had been in India for many years. In fact, he lost his wife also in the Bombay, those blasts. So he asked me, he said, I'm wonderstruck, how could an army officer be allowed to die like that? I said, no, in good faith, he went there to check if there's anything left so that his other jawans could move in. But he said, we don't do this. This was about 10 years or 15 years, I think, the Pampu thing had happened. I said, what do you do? He said, our robo goes in. It goes inside, it does the recce, whether everything is flushed out, and if there's something suspicious, it also fires it out. And we watch it happening on the computer screen. So that is correcting what the girl was saying. And soon we are going to have quantum technology, right? We are one of the few countries in the world. We are only one of the 7 countries in the world which are in that elite league of quantum. Mission Quantum Technology, Indian Quantum Mission was launched somewhere in March this year. Again, I must give credit to Prime Minister Modi because he's enabled us to take some of these very futuristic initiatives. Earlier on, we came in about 10, 15 years after others. If this TV screen is being used even for army operations, the army monitoring started happening in our country nearly 15, 20 years after USA. For example, in USA, way back in 1950, every household had a television. And the famous election of 1960, where John Kennedy defeated Nixon, was decided by a TV debate. Whereas we were wondering, what is TV, what is debate? At that time, they were monitoring their operations on the television. So it took us 15 years. But thanks, in the last 8, 9 years, we are now in the same pace. If the latest technology in the world is also available with India, and possibly at a much cost-effective rate. And that quantum technologies now would also enable you, in communication, of course, which much faster, much more confidential, much more secure. If you have to unfold those encrypted scripts that you see in WhatsApp, I was trying to figure out one day, and I read it took about more than 3 lakh crore attempts to crack that unencrypted script, if at all. By that time, I know whether one would be alive or not. Second, so it's going to be an important tool for armamentarium. Then the underground detection of tunnels and all those things. And I think many of us are not aware, which I think the forum like this can take up. We are already into it. Our 1 or 2 of our institutes in Bengaluru are actually producing have developed the technology which can detect all these underground tunnels. In fact, the other day I was also suggesting to some of the friends in the forces, I said, why don't you try this out over here, because you have a lot of infiltration now happening. The borders have been sealed, but the filtration through underground tunnels is still there. Then, of course, drones, we are much ahead of many other countries. We started using drones, and they are now also a part of the warfare strategies. We have the heli-borne technology, where you can just fly a helicopter and it can detect a soldier hiding inside a trench, hiding inside. So I think many of these technologies available now are the ones where you don't need to be physically very muscular, as you would have seen in the movies of the last century, where you have to throw all the heavy weaponry. But you have to be more of a technology savvy as well. So it would require an optimum mix of that. That also would contribute to the saving of the human life, which is equally important, which is now, I think, being highly valued in some of the other countries. We have just learned to realize that there's a value to human life as well. Maybe because we were too many in numbers, so we didn't. But now actually is the time. So I think when at a time, that's why I said it's one of the best times happening, one of the right times when you have taken up this subject is that we have a prime minister, we have a government which is technology savvy. And as far as defense is concerned, now we are also producing lightweight jackets. And not only many of our institutes, but you'll be surprised that even BARC Our Bhava Atomic Research Institute is producing those rackets, which are impenetrable because they are also dealing with the Department of Atomic Energy. So I think next time we could have some sessions spread over so that at least we could know what is there around. Because we have two sections of people. One is those who don't know, like this young lady asked. So she wanted to ask. But there are also those who don't know that they don't know. So what to do? So to make them know that this is what you should be, you ought to be knowing, but you don't know. So all this is available. Sometimes it makes one feel, restless why we are not putting it to use. Maybe that we are still getting used to it. And I think most importantly, the change of mindset is required. And these hereafter we would, of course, I'll grant you all the support and assistance as the General has very politely solicited. And that is, I think, precisely the task expected of the so-called chief guest or a minister. But more than that, I think next time you assign us a more academic responsibility. So we can arrange a couple of, at least one or two sessions, at least let's know what it's all about. So we are still talking of the glory of the past wars, which of course is good. It sounds good. I mean, if you see Mughal-e-Azam, it's very glorious. Prithviraj Kapoor looks better than actual Akbar. And if you see Sikandar, again, the same character. But the warfare techniques have undergone a sea change now. And I think we could actually hold, if I had known that this was, because I didn't know exactly what was it, I could have actually even arranged today, something like that. And could have come out to you with, I did that once, a small program for General Dwivedi, this Udhampur Corps, Northern Army Commander. He had asked me to do so. So we could actually arrange a kind of a session for you to understand, and that exactly would be also one of the reasons for us to celebrate. So when we celebrate the army and the heritage, the combining of that is our advantage. We have the combination of heritage with the modernity, and we are open to that. And that also we could institutionalize in a much bigger way. So while promising all that you expect from us, I would rather promise to you that we are ready to go one step further than that. So thank you, Narendra. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for addressing the gathering and for your presence here today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are now about to embark on a journey through India's rich tapestry of valor and heroism with the Veer Gatha sessions. Through vivid portrayals of the IPKF, witness their indomitable spirit and selfless act that forged a legacy of bravery. From the battlefields to acts of compassion, these stories transcend time, painting a vivid picture of the nation's gallant heart. Join us in celebrating these true heroes, acknowledging their sacrifices and preserving their legacy for generations to come. And with that, I would now like to invite on stage our esteemed panelists for this session. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Atul Kochar and retired AVM Samuel M. Nicodemus, VRC VSM. Please welcome them with a huge round of applause. And to conduct this session, I'd like to call on stage Komal Narvani, an author, resident storyteller, and a story creation workshop mentor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be on stage with two great officers who have contributed so much to the peacekeeping of the nation. Well, before I begin, I just want to ask a couple of people right here. I know it's afternoon, and I know it's a little time where you kind of get drowsy, but anyone who's heard about Amar Chitra Katha ever? Yes, there's one person there. Two at the back. Thank you so much. Okay, a couple in the corner. So before this, Dr. Jitendra just said that, we have to narrate the stories of India, and that's exactly what Amar Chitra Katha has been doing for years through comic books. And if at all you haven't ever read any of those, would definitely want you to take a look at some of our comics. And in continuation to that, I just want to say that we have a book called Paramveer Chakra, and that is all about the war of, the war that the brave men fought. And today, contradictory to this, when always we keep talking about, when we think of defense, every time we think of defense, it's all about war. But today, let's talk about the peacekeeping of it, which these two gentlemen have contributed so much towards. So moving on to the first question to Lieutenant Colonel Atul Kochar. Sir, your first book that you've written, could you describe a little about the theme of your first book and why you chose it? And I know before you could answer that, you have something for the audience. So, dear audience, this is a nice little clip for you. Let's take a look.
Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you, Komal. Before I talk about my first book, Valiant Deeds, Undying Memories, I'll take you back to August 1989, when deployed in a place called Kalmunai in Batticaloa sector, that is the southeast province of Sri Lanka. A merchant came up to me and said, "Sir, there is some Second Lieutenant Sandhu. He had paid some money for a camera." I looked at my company commander looked back at me, and I told him he's no more. Second Lieutenant Sandhu was killed in an ambush on 19 July 1988 while traversing the thick jungle. And he's central to this book on IPKF, hence he deserves a little elaborate mention. Anyway, that was it. I forgot about it. Later, after almost 2 years, he was awarded the Mahavir Chakra posthumously. He was ambushed and his RCL jeep was attacked by an RPG. Some 2 LTT guys, his legs were blown off. As he lay dying, he managed to, fire a few rounds of his 10 carbine when they came to take it from him. So that was it. He got the MVC. Cut to 2019. It struck me that what's wrong with this operation nobody hears about, nobody talks about, few have written about it. I discussed with my batchmates and they said, yes, why don't you form a group? Let's get these people together. What are their stories? So that was the beginning. We formed a WhatsApp group. There were amazing accounts by people and moving accounts by people of their bravery. And later we said, let's get it into a book. And such was born the anthology Valiant Deeds, Undying Memories. The origin also is very interesting. Valiant Deeds, Undying Memories was the epitaph. Actually, it is valiant were their deeds, undying be their memories, the epitaph in the Colombo Memorial, which was made in 2009. And India made the memorial for IPKF in 2014, 5 years later. So this epitaph we picked up for the title of this book. So they are forgotten soldiers. We lost 1,300, actually 1171. Even the figure is not matching. You see the figure in the Colombo Memorial, it's different. You see it here, it's different. We had 105 awards, of which 1 PVC and 6 Mahavir Chakras, and that is 97 Veer Chakras, apart from the other gallantry awards like Sena Medal. But it is forgotten largely. So this gentleman, Sandhu, his parents then made a room, he is a major judge from Chandigarh. They made a room to honor him. They gave away all their land to the Assam Regimental Center. So it moved me so much that I said something more has to be done. We must document their stories of the brave, starting with Sandhu. So Sandhu's account was actually shared with me by General Poonan of Mahar Regiment, who met him the day before he was killed in action. Now, with the help of the veteran community, we have made almost 100 webinars, articles, almost 10 books are there, thanks to this interest in IPKF. This was the seed and the theme and the reason which I selected for writing down this book. My whole group, that is almost 170 officers, they have contributed. We had so many accounts, I had to go into the second book as well. The first book, that is VDUM, we're talking about, it has accounts from Indian Navy, it has accounts from Air Force. Air Force did almost 70,000 sorties, unbroken record in the 32-month engagement. Naval ships, almost more than 1 lakh tonnage they picked up employing merchant ships. It has got so many firsts that it is mind-boggling. In one operation, we have got 13 Veer Chakras over just 2-night operation of the Jaffna Helibon Ops. But do you know about it? Do we honor these guys? No. So that is what we are aiming for. We want the nation to lay a wreath on them, which we are striving for and we have been doing for the last 3 years. So this is about my first book, video.
Thank you so much, sir. It's really inspiring to know that, just incidents like these, which are not really spoken about a lot, especially the peacekeeping part of it. And like sir rightly mentioned about 70,000 sorties that were done by the Indian Air Force. That part leads me to the first question for Air Vice Marshal Samuel, sir. So you're a living legend who has faced these bullets with bravery. You have been a part of this operation. What was the moment from that event that remains etched in your heart? I'm sure it has been a very, very memorable event to be part of, but what is that one moment that remains etched in your memories?
Thank you, Komal. I think it would be good for me to give you a brief account of the event itself so that you understand the context of it. The year was 1988, and I was part of the Air Force team which was based there, an Air Force unit which was flying the Mi-8 helicopters. And we were doing a lot of things like helicopters always do. And we were doing casualty evacuation. While the fighting was going on, we were doing transportation, we were doing logistics support, and we were doing firing as well. And one of the most interesting and exciting missions that we were asked to do during all the missions that we did was the support to the para-commando battalions. There were special missions in which we took these para-commando teams, dropped them in areas of the jungle where they were to carry out their operations, and then kept monitoring the progress of that operation and then picked them up when they finished that operation. They were always transported by helicopters. And it was in one such mission that I carried one of these teams to an area of the jungle which was known to have, suspected to have the headquarters of the LTT at that time. And there's a lot of deliberation as to whether we should actually do the mission or not. That's a different story. But we did finally get the order to go ahead and do this mission. And I went ahead and tried to drop this team in a very dense area of the jungle close to Mullaitivu. And I was escorted by an armed helicopter, but we couldn't see anything because the jungle was so thick. And when we started the operation, the leader of the team was just going down. We had to do it by winching because we couldn't land. The jungle was so thick. And in winching, the helicopter remains stationary at a height of about 25 meters above the treetop level. And then we slowly lower a steel cable with a motor, and the soldiers are winched down one by one. And when the leader went down, that's when the firing started. They were all there. The intelligence was correct. And while we were expecting this, so we were not completely taken aback, but we couldn't immediately take off or abandon the mission because there were a host of these people firing at us from very close range. We were just 25 meters off the ground and they were below us. And so we had to get the leader back up into the helicopter again. And that took about a minute. Now, 60 seconds is not a very long time in any other context. But when you are motionless in the air, 25 meters above the ground, and there were 30, 40 people firing at you, I assure you that 60 seconds is a very, very long time. And we remained there motionless, and I remember that 60 seconds is etched in my memory since then. It's been about 35 years now. And I can remember every expression on the faces of my crew. Very proud to say that nobody panicked. We just kept doing our job as we were supposed to be doing it. There were bullets coming into the helicopter. The 4 bullets came into the cockpit. My co-pilot was hit. My engineer was hit. But we just continued flying the helicopter till we got the leader back into the helicopter. Then we took off and came back to the base. By the time, of course, we later on came to know that the leader had died. So that was the unfortunate event, or that was the event for which I was awarded the Gallantry Award. Those 45 to 60 seconds, I can picture in slow motion whenever I think of it, with every expression on the faces of the crew and everything that went on second by second in that 60 seconds. Thank you.
That's really, when you were talking, sir, you can't even picture the moment. I really assure you that anybody here would agree with me when I say that it must have been such a heart-wrenching moment to see the leader, the crew get them on back over, and in that meantime, you're just hovering right there. Thank you for sharing that experience, sir. Since Sir has just spoken so much about the experience and so much in depth, it brings me to the next question for you, Lieutenant Colonel. That is, what is the kind of research that went into your first book? Because, there is so much of in-depth, from the minutest expressions to a little bit of details. So how difficult was it, and what all things did you do for your research for the book?
Now, as far as research is concerned, it was a tough call. We had some books, Brigadier Palsoskar, then General Dipender, then even Hardeep Puri ji, then late Natwar Singh ji. They have also written books on this, and there are few books on IPKF, but they didn't really satisfy my desire to bring out the qualifying acts of these people who are actually involved. Now, we had to get on to the social media to get people. And believe me, writing a book is far easier than any time before. It's a daunting task. Once you start, you get the flow. It's easy to write a book. The self-publishing model is an excellent model. You can literally write what you want about whatever subject you wish to. So I had the platform of a group which we had created, and people were coming forward with a lot of inputs. What are the accounts? Because this operations, the IPKF operation was fought in different theaters, each having different dimensions. In Jaffna, initially, October, in this very month, we have a bloody operation where we lost almost 200 soldiers. That is almost 17% of the total IPKF casualties of 1171. And more than 3,000 badly injured, mauled, Jawans who were quadriplegics, who lost eyes, who lost multiple limbs because of the advent of the IEDs there. IEDs made their mark there, when LTT being an expert. Unfortunately, we had only trained these guys, and they gave it right back to us. Anyway, coming to the research part, so these stories were readily available. In some cases, I found some conflicts. For example, the Helibon operation, I found conflict. The account which I had, and in another book somebody else had written. So one has to make a judgment and a call as to what to include, because it was radically opposite the account. Now, many people did not come forward. They did not want to talk about this operation because it had hurt the psyche so much. Some people were forthcoming and they gave their account. So, unfortunately, there is no official history of this operation. Like 62 war, it is destined to fade away. But thanks to the power of social media, we can still put across a lot of things. So we managed to get a lot of inputs and put it across in a coherent form. And then was born my second book. We'll come to that when she asks the next question.
Thank you, sir. So, just a little bit of addition to what sir has mentioned in terms of research, actually. You know, as an author, like sir rightly said, you know, you have a lot of content available online, but that also means that those many conflicts are available. You know, each story has its own twists and turns. So, you have to be very careful about what you actually put into the book, you know, and like we do in Amar Chitra Katha, we source we mention the source from where we actually got it. So if it's a Puranic Katha or if it's like some of the records from the research, we do make sure to mention that. So thank you so much for that input, sir. I would like to ask a slightly different topic from, the peacekeeping. I would move on to something very interesting of AVM sir's career, which is test flying. So he's been a test flyer for a great part of his career. And as a test flyer, sir, I'm sure you must have had the opportunity to explore some of the most extreme weather locations. From when I was reading about him, and I figured he's literally been to some of the harshest weather condition places. So while it sounds very thrilling, as a civilian, it might sound really thrilling, but what has been the toughest experience during these expeditions? Could you just throw some light on that, sir?
Thank you. I've had a very exciting flying career, apart from the Sri Lankan operation, which was one of my first operations which I took part in. I've been on 2 expeditions to Antarctica. I worked with the UN in Africa for some time. I flew Mi-17s there also. I've flown in certain other countries, and then of course I've done test flying and instructional flying and lots of other flying. And while many of these areas have had very demanding conditions and very exciting flying, I think almost all of them can more or less be replicated or even exceeded in our own country itself. We have some of the harshest terrains and weather conditions in our own country, from the heights of the Siachen Glacier to the rolling hills of the northeast, the deserts of Rajasthan, and the coastal areas. We've got everything in our country. So while I have flown in very diverse conditions in some of the most isolated areas in the world, I find that in many cases we have already seen the kind of conditions that are experienced there in our own country. But since you asked me about one of the most difficult ones, I would say it is flying in Antarctica, where we had to fly in very isolated conditions without adequate navigational facilities. We were flying in very bad weather conditions sometimes. The blizzards would suddenly hit without any warning. And there were whiteout conditions. There were all kinds of other problems which are associated with flying. So that has been one of the most challenging and exciting flying experiences of mine.
Thank you so much, sir, for narrating your experiences from that part of your career. being mindful of the time, I'll take last two questions. One for Lieutenant Colonel, sir, which is about, could you tell us a little more about your second book, which you've already written? And I think he has another little visual retreat for you guys. So could we please have the video on?
Please play the video, second video, please. The second book which I have written, that is called, not I, sorry, we. My co-author, Colonel B.R. Nair, he is also sitting in the audience, is resurrecting the IPKF legacy for obvious reasons. I think the title does not need any introduction. It needs resurrection, and badly. So that's how we decided on this theme. We have commemorated on our own as Veteran Initiative every year since 2021. So we have done the fourth commemoration on our own, getting the Veer Naris and the relatives of this thing. I'll just request Colonel Nair to stand up. He's my co-author sitting there. So he has been part of this journey, long journey, which we are still on. Just one point about Indian Air Force. They earned 4 Veer Chakras and 4 Vayu Sena medals in the Heliborne operation itself. There are 2 pilots. One was Group Captain Sapre and Group Captain Vinay. They did relentless sorties in the face of HMG fire, even sustaining damage to the aircraft. They did it at great risk. So this is what I want to point out. Second is that even the cover design, both books, that is the second one and first one, has been done by daughter of Colonel Nair. The graphics, Divya and Pooja both have helped. This video has been made by Colonel Nair's daughter. And same also, the book covers and all, design are all there. So it is an exclusive IPKF veteran attempt. We did 4th commemoration on 19th October. 5 Rajarif Napier had come forward. They got their Veer Naris. We got Solan Sikh also. Solan Sikh lost more than 40 Jawans they lost. And we also had some other units, that is 16 Rajarif. So this was done on 19 October. So as far as the second book is concerned, it generally follows the same pattern, but in this, the slight difference is we have done global interventions. We have treated as a separate chapter by Colonel Sidhu. That is the USP of the book. It was going pretty long. We had to cut it down. And you'll be happy to know that India does well in interventions, starting from the integration of princely states to Sikkim, and number of other Bangladesh, you can call it a full-scale war, but that was also an intervention. Your track record is good. Even IPK, for that matter, we had a role to conduct elections. We did it. We conducted the election. Now the political oversight has to take over at some point of time. That didn't happen. So this book also has a comprehensive bibliography and index Apart from that, it compares all the wars. And you may be surprised to know that Kargil we had about 548 casualties killed. This war had almost double. Supposedly 80,000 people, troops were deployed, but with 32 months deployment, if you take the turnover, 2 lakh troops only were turned over. It was a joint operation, you are aware. Air Force was involved in heavy lifting when in the initial Jaffna slog match. Thereafter, a Navy, of course, was involved. There were merchant vessels, requisition, and even landing crafts, which has been shown in this. And by rail, rolling stock, people coming from Gwalior, people were coming from east and all over. So this, all the maps also, they are totally indigenous effort. We hired a cartographer to help us out. No copying, nothing, everything is our own.
That's really incredible, sir. That actually just shows the passion with which they want to tell the stories, right? You know, so thank you so much for the highlights. Moving on to the last question for AVM, sir. So while I asked you for a lot of your experiences over other things where, you know, you were fighting and, you know, you had to be brave, I want to ask you something that is after the fight, when you were awarded the Veer Chakra, one of the highest military gallantry awards, you know, what was the thought that came to your mind while you were receiving the award?
That's a very interesting question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. You know, right through my childhood, my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, he always sent me a quote whenever he wanted to wish me, whether it was on my birthday or any other event. And the quote was, "Seest thou a man who is diligent in his work, he shall stand before kings and not before mere men." This is a quote from the Bible. And so I often read this quote when he sent it to me. It didn't really strike me till I stood there in the Darbar Hall of Rashtrapati Bhavan, and the president, that was President K.R. Narayanan, he awarded me the Veer Chakra there in the Rashtrapati Bhavan. And that's when I thought of my grandfather, because he was not alive at that time. But the true impact of that quote came back to me, and it has stayed with me ever since, right through my life. A man who is diligent in his work will stand before rulers, will be recognized by rulers.
That's truly wonderful, sir, because I do feel personally as well, you know, there are times when our elderlies, you know, parents, grandparents, teachers, they often quote something, and sometimes it does stay with us without really knowing the meaning of it until the actual moment arrives, and that's when you realize the true essence of it. So thank you for sharing that, sir, and I'm sure it will remain etched with us as well. Being mindful of the time, it's 3, we are done, but I would just like to take one question from the audience, if anyone has any questions. One question, anybody?
Okay, so just out of curiosity, I'd just like to ask my father and sir also over here, how has the journey been when it comes to, so politics and the operation that happened did not go hand in hand. So I just want to know more, if you could elaborate on, are the politicians still backing you? Are you guys getting help from the government, or is it solely on you people and how you guys are trying to handle it?
Well, the
Sorry,
question,
sir. Just want to say the question can only be asked by a daughter. Such a depth question. Please, sir, over to you.
okay. Now, this is a tricky one, all right. We have forwarded our case formally to Defense Minister for formal commemoration of the IPKF every year. We've suggested some dates. We've also written to the Army Chief, General Pandey. We have also met the AG number of times, but it has been 2 years since this cycle. All I know is the case is under consideration. And through the audience, through social media, we want to generate favorable sound bites to get this commemoration going and to give the people their due. We are hopeful that this happens because nowadays we have this CDS is there, and there are more interfaces than ever before, and DMA is there. So we are hopeful we'll ultimately have this happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for the question. Oh, could you also answer a bit?
I'm not directly involved with anything to commemorate the IPKF, but we are grateful to all those who are working for recognition on this account, and we hope also that this will soon be done so that all those who sacrificed so much, who did all the good work there, will be recognized and will be recognized for posterity also. Thank you.
Sir,
Make
actually,
a mention here. Air Marshal Mani Kantan commemorated it on 29 July on his own, Southern Command. He observed it on his own.
It's great to know, sir. Yes,
sir,
please.
actually, I have a question for Dr. Atul, sir. Sir, how strong do you think that LTT was at that time?
Well, LTT was trained by us. I hope all of you are aware of it. But I'll not go into why we did that. We had certain motives that the politicians know, but they were trained by Indian handlers, raw, and even there were camps all over. They were very motivated. They had a very strict code, no molestation of women. They wore cyanide capsules around their neck. And they were ruthless and they ruled by fear. Their own people were scared of them. They struck terrors in their hearts. And they were masters at improvisations. Gliders were found. I'm talking of 88. Gliders were found. They were supposed to have had surface-to-air missiles, but that was never proved, but suspected. And they were very efficient and innovative. For example, they will put a poster on this. Imagine this is the wall. So they will put a poster that IPKF go back. So some IPKF guy will try to remove the poster. He will find mine buried there and blow off his foot. Then they would use improvised explosive devices with number of ball bearing class pieces. They were masters at improvisation. They were very good at, used to use 100 to 200 kgs of explosives. So they were real masters, and hats off to them. They gave us a very, very tough time until we got our act together. Our sappers had their hands full.
That's really insightful, sir. Thank you so much for that question. We have to wrap up right now. And thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel Atul Kochhar. Thank you so much, Air Vice Marshal Samuel, sir. It has been an amazing discussion. I hope the audience got some more information, something more to learn, and I hope you enjoyed the session too. Thank you so much. Thank you.